Have you ever seen a UFO? Bigfoot or some ghosts? On Tactiles, there's Susie. She is the host. We really like to hear from you. You can tell us then all about the aliens. And if you're one of them, we really need to know. We really need to know. Really need to know, or we will come and get you in the night.
Hi, welcome to Out of This World with Susan and Willy. I'm Susan Spooler, your host, and today we are interviewing the esteemed Richard Dolan. Richard is joining us from an elegant apartment down in Lower Manhattan in New York City, and we'll be discussing. Richard's going to be our keynote speaker at the Greater New England UFO Conference in Leominster, Massachusetts on October 17th. So we are going to have a great conversation with Richard. Take it away. Richard, nice to meet you.
Thank you, Susan. I'm happy to be here. I just wanted to tell everyone listening, I really wasn't expecting to do this interview this time. I'm still in a rather casual attire here, little T-shirt, hanging around at a tiny little Manhattan apartment at my friend's house. But it's all worked out. I'm glad we can do it.
We're happy to have you. We're always into the spontaneous moment, and I certainly wasn't meaning to embarrass you or anything like
And
that.
I'm doing this on my phone, which is even cooler.
Even better, that's right. Technology at its finest. So, Richard, tell us about some of your books. You have a 2-volume set of UFOs and a national security state.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about those books? And
by all means. I've published 4 books. Those 2 volumes are the first 2 books that I wrote, and I guess they're the ones that often people still think about in terms of work that I've done. They're works of history, and they're 2 volumes of a projected 3-volume project, which there will be a 3rd volume, and they cover the history of the modern history of the UFO phenomenon and associated cover-up and the related politics associated with that. So the first volume covers the years 1941 to 1973, and volume 2 covers from 73 to 1991. They're both long books, and they do a couple of different things. They give a concise history of what I feel are the major sightings, the UFO sightings of those periods. My attempt to determine the attitude taken toward those by the political and military institutions, primarily the American military, American intelligence community. What did they think about these sightings? Was this an important phenomenon for them or not? My answer is it was, absolutely. And thirdly, the interaction with this phenomenon with civilians, with people. And one of the big themes of those 2 volumes, and will be in the 3rd, is the attempt by civilians to unlock the secrecy related to the UFO phenomenon. This has been a very important theme throughout. And so I try to weave those together against the backdrop of a world in change. Really what I've tried to do with those 2 books is to mainstream the history of the UFO phenomenon against the larger backdrop of our civilization. So that's those 2 books. I think they serve as good reference books for a lot of people, but I did write them as narratives that tell a story. I wrote, a few years ago, I co-authored a book about the future. Let's call it a speculative analysis of the future, which is called AD, After Disclosure. And this deals with the question of if there is a UFO reality, and if there is secrecy on the subject, which I believe both is true, what would happen then if that secrecy were ever to end? How would that transform our world? How would it change our civilization? And that was a really fascinating study. My co-author and I tried to handle it as close to a think tank as we could. So looking at all facets of our society, the politics, the science, religious institutions, culture, technology, and trying to see how those things would be changed. I think our conclusion, by the time we got to the end of it, was that The end of secrecy on the UFO phenomenon would probably be the single most transformative, radical, revolutionary event in our history. And that's probably a very big reason for the continued secrecy, because it really does change everything. And then I more recently, about a year and a half ago, published a summary of the entire UFO phenomenon and all of its unbelievable, frustrating, maddening glory, called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. It's an overview, but I want to think of it as a good overview, as a sophisticated introduction for someone who may not have read much about it. So it covers the history from the ancient phenomenon till today, the politics, and by that I mean the deep politics of how I see the cover-up operating, the science behind UFOs, which seems incredible and doesn't make sense, except that it does make sense when you look at a lot of current edge, leading edge science of our time. We're getting more and more able to understand how it would be that a craft could instantly accelerate, or maybe even travel through space or space-time, or even how telepathy, during apparent communications or alleged communications between us and whoever they are, in terms of consciousness. So all of those things are topics I deal with, and much more. So those are my 4 books. I've written a number of articles over the years. Not too many articles lately. I'm really trying to work on my new book projects. I am working on a non-UFO related book right now, which is a history of false flag operations. False flag, an easy Google search, basically something in which governments or an intelligence agency does something really awful, like blow up buildings and kill people, and blame it on other parties, like, say, terrorists, which I think there's a lot of that going around these days. So I'm doing a comprehensive history of that phenomenon. In addition to that, I'm a publisher, so I have my company is Richard Dolan Press, and I do publish books selectively by a number of other really excellent authors who are doing important work, and that does take up a bit of my time as well. So that's basically my life.
That's terrific. And yes, I noticed the FBI CIA UFO Connection was one of the books by Bruce Maccabee. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that's a really excellent book. Bruce Maccabee is probably one of the very top respected UFO researchers in the world, deservedly so. His book, by that title, is, in my opinion, the single best analysis of the UFO phenomenon in the 1940s and 50s with those organizations. Like, he really gets into it. And it's not just FBI and CIA, but also Air Force intelligence, which is not in the title, but that's very important as well. And he did a fabulous job. I'm publishing some other, this summer, 2015, some other really exciting books. One on the history of Russian USOs, that is unidentified submersible objects, essentially underwater UFOs. That'll be out before the summer's out. A study in encounters and abductions by a researcher named Mike Cleland, who I think is going to become very well known, on bizarre synchronicities in encounters that people have. This is a very, very bizarre topic. I really believe Mike's book is going to be one of the most significant books on encounters in the last generation, and I'm really proud to be publishing it. I'm publishing another book by Bruce Maccabee, actually 2 more by Bruce, a novel on the abduction phenomenon, which is ready to come out. That's quite good. And I was just chatting with him earlier today about another book we're going to publish called Hawk Tales, and this is a book about insider leaks and information that he got dealing with Area 51 and related matters, and it's a fascinating study.
Fantastic. So one question I did have for you is on the front of your book, the UFOs for the 21st century. What surgeon, put the hinge on the top of your skull?
Well, that was my idea in conjunction with a very good friend of mine, and I was thinking about the cover of that book. And it's a little bit, I guess you could say, controversial. Some people love it, and some people just absolutely hate it.
I love it.
I wanted a cover that was a little lighthearted, not making fun, but maybe having a little bit of fun. Sure. Something that looked a little more that it would appeal to maybe a younger audience. So it has a little Monty Python look there. My head sliced open
exactly
by a flying saucer with its golden wisdom, hopefully, being poured into my head, hopefully not taking anything out. I don't know. It could go either way.
That's right. You never know. It could be a two-way street. So, so what will you be speaking on at our conference in October? Can you?
Well, one of the main interests that I've been developing in the little more than the last year relating to this topic is looking at the international geopolitical dimensions of the UFO phenomenon. One thing.
You're kind of freezing up.
A lot of the details about what's going on worldwide, because there's not a lot of reporting data available in most other parts of the world.
Richard, could you repeat that part about the geopolitical? It kind of froze up for a second there.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at the geopolitical implications and outlook for the UFO phenomenon. As I was saying, this is a phenomenon that does not simply happen in the United States.
Right.
I think we all realize this.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of data about sightings that occur elsewhere in the world, but we do know that there's a lot happening. But I'm also looking at the international aspects of how this cover-up might operate. After all, people will often ask, well, if the United States military is covering up information, what about the Chinese? What about the Russians? What about other countries? What about Brazil or what have you? And why aren't they talking? And I've been putting some thought into this and doing some research, and I'll be discussing that. I'll also be discussing, I think, the possibilities, I won't say probabilities, but possibilities for this cover-up to end or for the secret to come out due to geopolitical things happening in the world today, and talking about what kinds of events might trigger, let's say, a kind of premature disclosure. And I also intend to talk about at least my current thoughts on how, I guess what I'll call the global elites, so those people really running or trying to run the human show, their thoughts on the UFO phenomenon and their attempts to deal with this reality, what they're trying to do, and what people can do as well. So that's basically, I think, going to be my quarry for October.
Okay. So going back in time when President Eisenhower was in power, I'd read a story or a couple of stories about how he met with beings from another world, another dimension. Do you know anything about that, or can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, this is a story that actually leaked out shortly after it allegedly happened in 1954.
Okay.
Back in those days, before there was Art Bell, there was a fellow named Frank Edwards, and he was the Art Bell of his time. He had a radio show, he had millions of listeners, and he talked about UFOs. Back then, they called them flying saucers.
Right.
Frank Edwards got this lead within weeks of this event allegedly happening. What the claim is that President Eisenhower took a trip to Edwards Air Force Base in California, where he supposedly met with extraterrestrial beings. Furthermore, it is claimed that they were essentially offering some kind of deal, which is cease your nuclear testing. And in 1954, people should remember, the United States was just about to undertake massive expansion of its hydrogen bomb testing program, which in fact it started to do. And according again to the claims, the United States declined. The aliens were going to provide technology or other trinkets that they may have had to the United States. That's the story. There are a couple of sources that talk about this. And of course, like everything else of importance in the UFO field, they are disputed endlessly by researchers. Did it happen? Did it not happen? I would not rule some kind of meeting out. I have never ruled it out. Other people think it's total nonsense. But
it's fascinating how this topic will just suck us in, and there's no escape.
It sucks you in and it keeps you in if you're willing, because what I have found is um, the first year that I was really looking into this was in some ways the hardest year, and in some ways the most exciting year, because it was the year that it really shattered my old paradigm of what I thought reality was. Back in those days, I always thought I was a bit ahead of the curve. I was a very good academic student.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd read a lot about the world, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on it. But of course, the whole UFO piece was absent from all of those analyses. And by the time you get into your 30s, your worldview is normally getting settled in, and you think you have a handle on how things really are.
Right.
And I think we become less and less inclined to revisit those fundamental ideas because it's difficult, especially once you get a career going. If you get into some professional job, slowly but surely you become invested in a certain kind of reality.
Right.
And I remembered thinking, well, my goodness, if this UFO reality is real, and I believe that it was real because of the documents that I was finding. They'd already been released through the Freedom of Information Act, but they were new to me, and they described very serious reports by top generals and intelligence directors about violations of sensitive airspace by objects that did not look normal, that were not behaving normally, and so forth. And these were clearly events that were being taken seriously. And to me, that's a very important development. And I kept asking myself, well, if this is true, then there's a whole bunch of questions that arise. If this is true, what is the actual clandestine history of my country and of the government of the United States? If this is true, did any of the United States presidents know about this? And they must have. What is the history of Eisenhower's relationship to this, or Kennedy's relationship, and so on? So it was an intellectual thing, but there was also a lot of other questions, like if this is true, where was the media in all of this? Where are the political institutions? Where's the scientific community? So this really led me into looking into all of those questions and trying to understand the true structure of power in the United States and in the world. How does this all work? And, the deeper you go, the more you realize, oh, well, yeah, the media actually is much more controlled than I had thought back when I was a younger guy. The political institutions ditto, even the scientific community. People like to think of our academic and scientific institutions as independent, but in fact, when you really dig into it, maybe not so much. And so really the UFO phenomenon, and that's just the beginning, it forced me to reevaluate my ideas. And the farther into this phenomenon you go, the more strangeness that you are willing to look into, the more it continues to force you to reevaluate your ideas, not just on your society, but on reality itself, because there's some strange things happening. So, like in the movie The Matrix, where Neo is offered the red pill and the blue pill, and he takes that red pill, and his reality is made available to him. I wish it were that easy. One red pill, I'd be done. But with this phenomenon, you're actually taking a new red pill. It's like every year. You think you understand more when you make a breakthrough, and you think, oh, yes, I understand. But then there's still farther and farther down the road to go. And I'm certainly not at the end of the road here. This is continuing to challenge me in many different ways. And I've now been 20 years into this field.
No, that's a very interesting point. I know that in Leominster, where our conference is going to be held, we have a part of town that we always referred to as Monsterland, and people have had a lot of unusual experiences. And two of the speakers that you'll meet are writing a book about Bigfoot, and they have plaster castings of the footprints. And one of the recent things that people have been saying about Bigfoot and UFOs and orange orbs are that Bigfoots are potentially interdimensional. I don't know how much you've studied into that, but just as my evolution of studying UFOs and paranormal since I was a child have changed, have certainly changed over the years as well, and I certainly agree with you. So.
Yeah, the Bigfoot phenomenon. I find it interesting, and I'm certainly not a skeptic or a debunker on that. I don't know as much about that as a lot of other people do, but I have spoken with Bigfoot researchers for sure. There is a very good researcher who does a lot of Bigfoot and UFO research, and his name is Stan Gordon. He lives in Western Pennsylvania. Stan has been researching both of these phenomenon for many years. And it is his opinion, maybe like yours, that there is a connection between the two. That I think, from my take on his research, that he also believes that there's something more to that phenomenon than simply a crypto creature.
Right.
That there's something that connects them to the UFO phenomenon or other dimensions of reality. It's hard for me to comment on that. I don't really know where I stand on it.
Sure.
But I've spoken to Bigfoot witnesses myself. They are exactly like UFO witnesses. In other words, they're typically very ordinary people. The guys that I spoke to were predominantly hunters, young guys,
Yes.
sharp as far as I could tell.
Yep.
And they had encounters. One man spoke to me. He said he got to within 60 to 80 feet of it. And I'm thinking, I love baseball, and I'm thinking that's less than a run to first base.
Yeah.
Not that far, right?
No, it's not.
You got a very good look at it. And I asked him, well, how do you know it wasn't a bear? And he said, well, two reasons. One, this was brown, and we don't have brown bears in the area. And two, he said, it wasn't a bear. He said, I mean, I know it was funny, but he was quite adamant. He said it was standing straight up. It stood erect. It didn't move. It didn't look like a bear, and it looked right at him and actually frightened him.
Yeah.
And he backed slowly away, and then it just turned and walked away.
Okay. Wow. There's so much out there that's
It's a strange story.
Yeah.
I mean, what you find, if someone's willing to look into the real strangeness in this world, they'll find it.
Right.
And really, we call it strange, but I guess you could say it's strange because our worldview makes it strange.
Right.
We have a particular way that we're supposed to look at the world, and it's basically a materialist sort of view, not different from what I would call 19th century Victorian materialism, that attitude of reality as a concrete phenomenon. We can measure it, we can grasp it.
That's right.
But really, when you think about it, we have these brains in our heads, which work very well, but they're not omniscient. They're a little higher up than maybe the brain of a dog or of a lower primate, but we have our limitations. And what if there are creatures that are able to perceive in ways that we really are not able to grasp? If they have an ability to manipulate space-time reality in ways that we are not cut out to manipulate ordinarily. So I think there's totally entirely possible that there's a reality, a transcendental reality to us that we may forever be having difficulty grasping, but that these other beings may not have such difficulty. And so it would be like us going into a fish pond.
Right.
And the fish, well, I don't know if fish really notice us or not, but if they did notice us, they really wouldn't know much about us.
Yes.
And they certainly wouldn't know about our life on land.
Right.
We go in and we come out, and maybe these other beings, maybe that's what they do. They come into our reality. We perceive them to some extent, can't really grasp what this is about, and then they leave. It's only an idea. I don't know if it's true, but it is helpful, I think, for us to remember we're not omniscient creatures.
No.
We have limits to what we're able to understand. And I believe that the UFO phenomenon is one example of that fact, in which there's a phenomenon that we bump into in our life every so often, but we don't always really grasp it. Now, that's one aspect of the UFO phenomenon. Another aspect is, I think, much more concrete and material, which I think does involve what we would call craft. I believe this is so. Very advanced craft of extraordinary technology, some of which I've come to believe we make.
Right.
I think that this is very likely the case, and I'll talk about it.
Great.
In October at Leominster.
Okay. So tell us about you have a radio.
Some of these other craft that we.
Okay. Oh, hang on, it was stopping a second. Can you hear me now? That's good.
Yeah.
So you said some of the other craft are?
Well, I think some of the other crafts, so let's say the ones that we don't make, they could be entirely technological, but also with an ability to manipulate or weave in and out of our space-time reality in ways that we just don't really understand.
Okay. Now you have a radio show.
Yes.
And tell us about your radio show. How often is it, and when is it, and where is it?
Well, I've been doing it for about 3 years. Over the years, I've done many hundreds of radio interviews for other hosts, and I kept started to feel frustrated because I kept talking about the same things over and over again. Interviewers asking me really the same questions, and when you do it like 300 times, it starts becoming a little boring.
Yes.
And I thought I have certain things that I think I'd like to say. And I was offered the possibility in I guess it was in 2012, to do my own show with a network called KGRA Radio, run by a man who's a very very good friend of mine now, Ray Hobbs. And he just said, would you like your own show? And I said, I'll do it. So I have a program called the Richard Dolan Show, and it is on KGRA Radio once a week, every 2 hours, Monday evening, 8 to 10 Eastern time. And sometimes I'll just do it solo. I'll just go on and just talk.
Okay.
Crazy as it sounds, I try to keep things organized and make it interesting. I do have guests on frequently as well, and I've had some pretty very interesting guests on lately. But I wanted the show in many ways to be a solo effort because I have a lot of things I like to discuss.
No, that's fascinating, and we appreciate your time talking to us today, as well as attending and being our keynote speaker for the Greater New England UFO Conference. So
I'm looking forward to it.
we are as well.
I love coming out to New England every time, and I know this will be a great event.
Yep, and especially it'll be in the midst of leaf season, so it'll be beautiful.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
well, Richard, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in October.
My pleasure, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day. Take care.
Have you ever seen a UFO? Bigfoot or some ghost? On tactiles, there's Susie. She is the host. We really like to hear from you. You can tell us then all about the aliens. And if you're one of them, we really need to know. We really need to know. We really need to know, or we will come and get you in the night.